Welcome to Times Square, home of many lovely things such as knockoff mascots, aggressive capitalism, weed dispensaries, this guy just absolutely busting a move, and Broadway. This is a jukebox musical. This is also a jukebox musical. And this is a jukebox musical. Oh, and this one. And the one next to it is also a jukebox musical. Broadway is just absolutely crawling with jukebox musicals right now, but where did they come from? And how did they get here in the first place? Well, we're going to talk about that, but first, I have a secret to confess and something very important to tell you. I am a theater kid. I know. Not only am I a theater kid, in May, I will be graduating with a degree in theater kid. Yeah, that's what it's going to say on my degree. It's just going to say theater kid. That's right, I am a drama major, and I am also a musical theater minor, so I like to think I know at least a little bit about musicals, hopefully after 4 years. Whether you clicked on this video already knowing what a jukebox musical is or having never heard about it in your entire life, I'm going to give you a definition and a quick rundown anyways. A jukebox musical is defined as a musical in which the majority of the songs are well-known popular music songs rather than original music. Often the music has something in common with each other, so it could be all from the same artist or the same time period or the same genre, stuff like that. Recently, I've taken notice of the fact that there has been an increasing number of jukebox musicals, both on Broadway and just in development, as can be seen from my previous little trip to Broadway I just took a few minutes prior. This isn't necessarily a new trend. The number of jukebox musicals on Broadway, off Broadway, and just around the world has been steadily increasing since the early 2000s, and it doesn't seem to be stopping. But in order to understand this growth and why it's happening now, we must first go back in time to the origins of the jukebox musical.
It's a musical, and nothing's as amazing as a musical with song and dance.
As I previously defined, the jukebox musical uses music that already exists out in the world in other formats. To break it down even further, there are 3 general subcategories to the jukebox musical: the biomusical, or biopic musical as I will be calling it in this video, the tribute musical, and the original jukebox musical. The biopic musical is a musical biography typically of a musician or music group. They tend to tell parts or all of the subject's life story, and most often utilizes music that the individual wrote, created, or sang. The tribute musical is similar to the biopic, except it tends to be more of a tribute or concert of the artist's music rather than telling a story. Lastly, the original musical takes the pre-existing music to form a completely original and new story that connects the songs. In the case of the biopic and original jukebox musical, these musicals find a way to weave a story into the songs and combine them like puzzle pieces to make a coherent narrative that may not have otherwise existed in the individual collection of songs. It's also worth distinguishing that the theatrical term of a jukebox musical tends to apply when music of genres outside of musical theater and show tunes are utilized in the theatrical setting. You can take a bunch of Sondheim music and rearrange it to make a new story, but that would be considered more of a revue than a jukebox musical, since the music was originally composed for the theater. I always thought of the biopic musical as a subgenre of the jukebox musical, but in reality we should kind of be looking at it more of a Venn diagram. If we want to define a biopic generally, we can define it as any musical that tells the events of a real individual's life and story. Under this definition, original musicals such as Hamilton, Bonnie and Clyde, and Come From Away can be considered biopic musicals, since they're based on the lives of real people. However, they aren't jukebox musicals, since they contain original music written just for that show. There is a significant overlap between the biopic and the jukebox when we begin to talk specifically about the lives of musicians and artists. When a show takes the life and trials and tribulations of a musician and uses their music and songs to tell said story, that is when it becomes a biopic musical. It's generally unclear when the actual term jukebox musical started being used for these types of shows, but if we really want to go to the very, very beginning of their development, we have to travel way back to 1728. The Beggar's Opera by John Gay premiered in the Lincoln Inn Field Theater in January of 1728 to an audience that sat in stunned silence before collectively deciding the show was a sensation. Pulling from early forms of theater such as comédie and vaudeville, what am I saying? Comédie and vaudeville. Comédie and vaudeville. I took history of drama. I apparently didn't do well in speech though, because I can't talk. Pulling from early forms of theater such as comédie. No, what? Hello? Maybe I'll just put the part in where I struggle to say it. It's comédie and vaudeville. There we go. Pulling from comédie and vaudeville. Good God. Gay created a plot surrounding the gritty crime of the 1720s and a score with 40 of its 69 songs taken from already popular, mostly Scottish, ballads of the time. Instead of the direct utilization of songs, he took the melodies that people already knew and kind of changed the words to make it fit the show. So it's almost more of a parody of the songs rather than what is typically known to be a jukebox musical. Nevertheless, the play developed a genre now known as the ballad opera and can be cited not only as one of the origins of the jukebox musical, but an origin of just modern musical theater in its entirety. The Beggar's Opera was eventually taken and adapted by famed German playwright Bertolt Brecht, which resulted in the Threepenny Opera. Fast forward a couple of centuries to 1975, in which The Night That Made America Famous, featuring the music of Harry Chapin, opened on Broadway. Broadway.com credits this show to be the first jukebox musical, as we see them today. However, a year after this, the show Bubbling Brown Sugar, which featured the music of early African-American Harlem Renaissance artists, opened. This is what Wikipedia cites as the first jukebox musical. From my understanding, The Night That Made America Famous featured both songs written by Harry Chapin for the musical itself and songs he had already written. This is why it's categorized a little bit differently and doesn't completely fit into the jukebox musical category as we are examining it today. However, from these two musicals in the mid-1970s, the idea behind the jukebox musical started to catch on, with Elvis opening in 1977 about the life of the singer, Beatlemania, Ain't Misbehavin', and You came out in this decade and can also be categorized as jukebox musicals, but closer to the review type we were speaking about earlier. Basically, jukebox musicals started to appear roughly 5 decades after what is credited to be the first American musical, which was Showboat in 1929. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a jukebox musical would roughly be produced every 3 to 4 years, with about 5 to 8 being produced in the entirety of the decade. What was more popular at this time was the jukebox musical on screen rather than on stage. Many films in the 1940s to 1960s utilized this jukebox musical approach and contained popular music from the time or music of one specific genre or artist. An American in Paris and Singing in the Rain are examples of really popular 1940s movie jukebox musicals that both eventually got adapted into stage shows. Where the jukebox musical really started to pick up traction was actually in London on West End with a little show that I don't know if you guys have heard of. It's a little underground, and I mean, you probably haven't heard of it. Yes, Mamma Mia!
Mamma Mia!
Opened on the West End at the Prince Edward Theatre in 1999. Featuring the music of the Swedish band and Eurovision winner ABBA, and was a smash hit. The show is still currently running on the West End, which makes it the 6th longest running show in West End history. Mamma Mia opened on Broadway in 2001 at the Winter Garden Theatre, and resided there for several years before moving to the Broadhurst Theatre and closing in 2015. This makes it the 9th longest running show in Broadway history, and spurred the movie adaptation many non-theater goers are familiar with in 2008. I was going to describe the movie, but I don't think I really need to do that. That's not what we're focusing on right now. Just know it contains funny dancing, themes of womanhood and mother-daughter relationships, Meryl Streep, and is ground zero for an abundance of TikTok trends and audios that you probably have heard. But what it also contains is an original plot utilizing pre-existing music, and though it wasn't the first show to do this, it was the first one to be such a smash hit on a global and cultural scale, and therefore pushed jukebox musicals into the spotlight. After the popularity of Mamma Mia, the genre really began to pick up, and with the turn of the century came the rise of the jukebox musical. She said the title. Multiple jukebox musicals were being produced and opened each year, as opposed to the every 3 to 4 years that existed in the late 90s. It's also important to note that when I say that these musicals are produced and opened, I'm not limiting it just to Broadway. I'm talking off-Broadway, West End, productions in other countries, stuff like that. Since Mamma Mia found its success in London, many early 2000s jukebox musicals began on the West End with eventual transfers to Broadway. With Mamma Mia bulldozing the path to success, jukebox musicals just started crawling out of the woodworks left and right. My good friends, here is a speed run of some of the more popular jukebox musicals that appear from the 2000 to the present day. Movin' Out is an original musical that uses the music of Billy Joel, opening in October of 2002 and running until 2005. All Shook Up is an original musical using the music of Elvis that combines the characters and plot twists of various works by William Shakespeare. Opened in March of 2005 and had a short run, closing only a few months later in September. Jersey Boys can be cited as one of the other incredibly successful jukebox musicals and provided a modern launching point for the phenomenon of the biopic musical. Focusing on the formation, success, and breakup of the 1960s group The Four Seasons, it uses their music to focus in on the four singers. It ran on Broadway from 2005 to 2017. Rock of Ages combined a whole bunch of different rock songs from the 1980s to make an original musical that frequently broke the fourth wall and ran for 7 years, opening in 2009 and closing in 2015. Yes. Not 14. American Idiot is a rock musical based on the Green Day conceptual album of the same name. Despite only running for a year, April of 2010 to April of 2011, it's been incredibly influential in not only the jukebox musical specter, but the rock musical rise that has also been seen in modern productions and music. Beautiful, the Carole King musical, is a biopic musical telling the story of the life and career of singer and songwriter Carole King. Despite Jersey Boys being what I think is kind of the first of the really successful biopic musicals, I think Beautiful marks another starting point of the modern increase of musicals focusing on singer and songwriters' lives and discography. It ran from January of 2014 to October of 2019. Motown is another biopic based on Berry Gordy's autobiography, utilizing Motown music from the time and the Motown record label. It ran from April of 2013 to January of 2014. On Your Feet is a biopic musical based on the life and music of Gloria and Emilio Estefan, using their music that ran from November of 2015 to August of 2017. Summer, the Donna Summer musical, is a biopic musical about, you guessed it, Donna Summer, using her music and life story. It ran from April of 2018 to December of 2018 and utilized the casting tactic of casting 3 different actresses to play Donna Summer at 3 different points in her life. Escape to Margaritaville is not the title of Ted Nivison and Eddie Burbach's recent endeavor, but an original jukebox musical using Jimmy Buffett's music. It ran from February to July of 2018. Tina is not about Tina from Bob's Burgers, although I'd like to see that musical, but Tina Turner using her music. It's fairly typical of biopic musicals, and it's one of the few that I've actually seen. It ran from November of 2019 to August of 2022, having been halted due to the COVID shutdown. Jagged Little Pill is one of my favorite musicals, despite its many controversies it unfortunately underwent. It's an original musical using music from the Alanis Morissette album of the same name, along with some other songs of hers. It ran from December of 2019 to December of 2021, also being a victim of the COVID Broadway shutdown and ultimately closing earlier than intended due to a COVID outbreak in the cast. Head Over Heels is an original musical that uses the music of the Go-Go's and is an underrated banger of a musical. It ran from July of 2018 to January of 2019. Share music, shares life. What else can I tell you? It ran from December of 2018 to August of 2019. Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations is exactly what you would expect from the title. The Life and Times of the Temptations. It ran from March 2019 to January of 2022. Paused due to COVID. Moulin Rouge is based on the hit movie of the same name and follows the movie's format of taking a bunch of pop songs from the time and just weaving them into an original storyline. It opened on June of 2019 and is still currently running. MJ uses Michael Jackson's music and walks the audience through Michael Jackson's life and career. It was scheduled to premiere during 2020, but due to COVID, it opened February of 2022 and is still running. And Juliet is the same deal as Moulin Rouge, with an original plot using pop songs interpreted interwoven into it. It opened on Broadway in November of 2022 and is still running currently. A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical, is a biopic musical telling the life story of Neil Diamond and his career utilizing his music. It opened on December of 2022 and is still running. Once Upon a One More Time uses Britney Spears music set to an original plot that opened in June of 2023 and is still running. And that, ladies and gentlemen and friends, is a rundown of all of the decently well-acclaimed jukebox musicals post Mamma Mia. I feel like I gotta go lay down after that. Okay, so looking at the musicals that I just described, let's take a little look at some statistical information regarding them, shall we? I just listed 20 jukebox musicals to open on Broadway in the 2000s. Of those 20 musicals, 10 of them are biopic musicals. Now, I'm not great at math, but I do know enough to know that half of 20 is 10. Thank you, I did graduate from high school. So 50% of those musicals were biopic, while the other 50% were original. And all but one of those biopic musicals opened in Broadway within the past 10 years. So, why? Where did they all come from, and why now? Well, to put it simply, Broadway is a business. As much as I wish it was just a way for people to showcase all their original ideas and concepts, the industry has to make money somehow, and making money sometimes outweighs the possibilities that comes with an original idea. If a big-name Broadway executive is faced with the decision to choose between an original musical by someone no one has ever heard of, with music no one knows, and a musical about an already popular public figure with a large fan base and music people hear on the radio all the time, one of those options is just inherently more riskier than the others in terms of putting people's butts in the seats. And unfortunately, Broadway isn't really in a place right now to be making those risks. Let's look at the statistical graph by the Broadway League of the grosses in attendance of each Broadway season since 1980. Do you see that right there? It is not hard to guess what season that is. In 2020, the United States got absolutely bulldozed by a little thing you may have heard of. It's called COVID-19. The entire country practically went on lockdown, or at least should have, and one of the first areas to get hit the hardest in the early stages of the pandemic's arrival to the US was New York City. On March 12th, Broadway shut down due to gathering restrictions and a concern for audience and performers' safety. What was originally supposed to be a 30-day shutdown turned into a year-and-a-half closure until Broadway reopened its doors in fall of 2021. Unsurprisingly, this hurt the industry. From here, the musical theater industry has been in a state of recovery and rebuilding as a result, so of course producers are going to be a little less likely to take risks. In show business, there are no safe choices. After all, just because it's a jukebox musical doesn't mean it's going to be a success. But there are safer choices. Those choices are jukebox musicals and film adaptations that an audience already knows and is familiar with. Extensively, after a period of just such uncertainty and darkness for the country that we still remain in today in some form, an audience tends to want to see a happy story. They desire an uplifting story of success and humble beginnings, like many of the biopic musicals depict. Audiences, right now, want to feel good because so much in this world makes us feel bad. So, shows use music and lyrics that trigger a sense of nostalgia or happiness and recognition from the audience. The influx of jukebox musicals and biopic stories was beginning before the COVID shutdown, but COVID really just heightened it and solidified the fact that we'll be seeing many more jukebox musicals in the years to come. And I want to make it clear this isn't a negative criticism of the jukebox or biopic musical. I love so many jukebox musicals and 100% agree with their novelty and appeal. They can be incredible works of art, tell compelling and entertaining stories, and serve as a format to entice audience members that may not have otherwise been interested in seeing a Broadway show. Jukebox musicals can project meaningful themes, social criticism, and foster growth in the theater industry in ways the original musical can as well. But we mustn't forget that there can also be a special charm to a completely original score and work of art coming from the depths of a playwright and composer's mind. The jukebox musical and original musical can coexist, and for the foreseeable future, coexist they must.